If you're training jiu-jitsu but you still look like a wet noodle in a rash guard, this episode is for you. I'm giving you the full blueprint on how to build real muscle, get jacked, and develop brutal strength that actually transfers to your skills on the mat. If you're tired of getting tossed around at jiu-jitsu and you want to multiply your muscle so you can multiply your hustle on the mat, stick around because this podcast is going to be packed. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. I am fired up and excited to be hanging out with you guys today. We're talking about hypertrophy. We're talking about how to build muscle, how to get jacked and tan, and this is all in preparation for the release of my brand new training course called Mat Jacked, which is launching here hopefully within just a couple weeks. I'm super excited and fired up to share with you guys all of the best practices and tips and methods to building quality muscle that actually helps improve your athleticism on the mat. And in today's episode, I'm pretty much just laying out the entire blueprint for you. So what I wanted to start with first is go over a couple reasons why you may not be seeing the gains in muscle growth that you're hoping for. I think a lot of grappling athletes want to be jacked. I mean, like a lot of the top guys in the sport are crazy jacked, and it's awesome. Who doesn't want to be jacked, right? I don't know anybody that doesn't want to be jacked. I think that's crazy if you don't want to be jacked. But if you're listening to this podcast episode, you're my people. I already know that you want to be jacked, and if you're jacked already, you're trying to get more jacked. If you're not jacked, you're trying to get started and get on the path to being jacked and tan. And there's a couple things that I see consistently holding grapplers back from being able to pack on slabs of muscle. And the first one is just random lifting or random workouts with no real progression. In a podcast I did a couple weeks ago, actually probably a lot longer than a couple weeks ago, maybe this was like a few months ago, I talked about the principles of strength training. And the first and most important principle is specificity. You have to train specific to the types of adaptations, specific to the goals that you have. So if you want to build some muscle specifically for jiu-jitsu, you have to train in a way, have a structured training program, have a structured set of workouts and exercises and all of those things that are specific to the goal of building muscle that helps you as a grappling athlete. If your goal is to build muscle as a grappling athlete, yet your workouts consist of like, oh, one day I do yoga for 30 minutes, another day I go run for 60 minutes, another day I do hill sprints, another day I do like a powerlifting workout and just deadlift, and on day 5 I do all stretching and mobility. It's like, okay, well, all those things are nice, yet none of those things, except for maybe the deadlifting, are really that specific to helping you build a muscle that's going to help you as a grappling athlete. So the biggest thing that's holding grapplers back could be yourself listening to this podcast from being able to pack on slabs of muscle is you're just not training specifically for muscle growth. And that's okay, because in today's episode, I'm going to show you how to exactly train specifically for muscle growth. The next thing that's holding a grappler back from being able to pack on slabs of muscle is they might be training specifically for muscle growth, but they're focused on a couple of the wrong things. They're focused on getting crazy sore in every workout, and they're focused on only getting a crazy pump, doing tons of high rep circuits and things like that. And that's not to say that soreness is always a bad thing. That's not to say that higher rep circuits and chasing a pump is a bad thing. However, those are not always going to be the most important things to focus on if your goal is to maximize muscle growth. There are actually a couple other things, such as mechanical tension and taking things pretty close to failure, that are going to be much greater drivers of muscle growth as opposed to only chasing to get sore or only chasing to get a crazy pump. The next thing that's oftentimes holding grapplers back from being able to pack on slabs of muscle is poor nutrition. Nutrition is not just about fueling your body for the training that you do in the gym or on the mat. It's also about providing your body with the proper nutrients that are going to be required to recover and build muscle following those training sessions. It's almost like if you're in this podcast, a lot of the examples and analogies that I give are probably going to have to do with F1 because I just saw that movie and it was freaking dope. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. My guy, Brad Pitt, he killed it. Anyways, but if in the F1 movie, when they're racing, they have to refuel and get gas throughout the race. Like they don't just do one lap as hard as they can and they're like, all right, that's it. They got to do multiple laps. And if you don't have enough gas in the tank and you keep going past your pit stop, if that's what it's called, without getting gas, you're gonna run out of gas and you're not gonna be able to finish the race well. Your body works very similarly where, yeah, you definitely need gas in the tank, so to speak, to train really, really hard. You also need gas in the tank to lift heavy ass weights, to roll hard on the mat and all that stuff. But you also need the proper nutrients, you need the proper different types of macro and micronutrients and different vitamins and other supplements and things after your training is over with to help your body recover. Because it's not about what you do in the gym or on the mat that leads to progress. It's about what you do and can recover from. So if you're specifically training for hypertrophy, if you got that on lock, if you're not getting too distracted by only chasing soreness or only chasing a crazy pump and you're really training the right way for building muscle, but you're still not seeing any muscle growth happen, it's probably your nutrition. That's probably the culprit on why you're not able to pack on slabs of muscle, because your body just doesn't have enough of the raw materials to facilitate muscle growth. And then the last thing that is oftentimes holding grapplers back, and this is kind of similar to the first thing I said, is that they don't really have much of a plan. Random workouts in the gym that don't have much of a structure are kind of a problem, and also having a random plan where you're not able to properly track your progress from week to week to week is also a problem. I think that when people talk about training, that like I've seen people go through these phases where they might get like really locked into a training program. They're all about tracking every single tiny detail that I can possibly think of. They're like, man, I took 6 breaths between this rep or this set, and they write it down in their little notebook. That was definitely me. Like I was definitely a notebook fiend when I started lifting. And I think that's great. And after a while, I've seen that those people sometimes get caught in this point where they go, I just train based off feel. And that's okay too. There's a time and place to just take things by feel. But if you don't have a way to track your progress, how do you know you're actually getting stronger? How do you know for a fact that the work that you're doing week after week after week is contributing in the right ways to you packing on slabs of muscle? One of the best indicators of muscle growth is seeing yourself get stronger from week to week to week and month to month to month, as well as weighing yourself and tracking your body weight. If you have all these different things taken care of and you've dotted all your I's, you've crossed all your T's and all that stuff, you should see that you are continuing to get stronger week after week after week, month after month after month. Maybe you have some down weeks in there because you're a little banged up from jiu-jitsu or you're a little fatigued for whatever reason. Those happen, that's totally fine. But on average, you have seen a positive progression of strength, and on average, you have seen a positive progression of body weight. If you're not seeing those things, that's a mistake. That's a sign that you're probably not packing on slabs of muscle and you're doing something wrong in how you're going about this muscle building process. And unfortunately, you're not able to get jacked for jiu-jitsu. You're not able to get mat jacked. So those are the common mistakes that I see way too many grapplers make, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes. And so if you're listening to this podcast episode, you're already on the right track, because I'm going to show you exactly the steps that you can take to have the greatest hypertrophy or muscle growth stimulus. In a podcast a couple months ago, I talked about something called the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. And when we think of a training stimulus, that's oftentimes the workout, the specific exercise, the sparring round, whatever we're doing, whatever physical activity we're doing, that is a type of training stimulus. And so imagine, if you can picture this in your head, you have a graph, or if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you have this graph, right? And imagine there's a line in the middle. That is baseline. Your training stimulus, whether that's a workout or a hard jiu-jitsu session, that causes some fatigue. And so you dip below baseline. But the stimulus recovery adaptation curve is that line as you dip down below baseline due to the training stimulus, you recover, come out of that kind of fatigue state at the bottom, you hit baseline, but your body is amazing at making adaptations, so then you go above baseline, and then the baseline raises up a little bit. So an easy way to look at this is like when you first started training jiu-jitsu, you know, all of us remember what it was like those first couple weeks of jiu-jitsu. We're doing, 5-6 minute rounds was like the most insane, difficult thing ever. Like we were so cooked and so gassed at the end of those 5-6 minute rounds. But after a while, you learn, your body adapts, you get a little bit better conditioning, you stop making some mistakes on wasting energy and all that stuff. You make adaptations to where doing 5-6 minute rounds really isn't that difficult. You might be pretty sweaty, you might be out of breath a little bit, but you're not like completely smoked like you were when you first started training jiu-jitsu. So that is just an example of how awesome your body is at making adaptations. However, your body is so good at making adaptations, it makes adaptations specific to the type of demands put upon it. So if you are, running a marathon, the adaptations you're going to create are going to be very specific to running that marathon. And so it's important that if your goal is to pack on slobs of muscle, we are specific in the type of training stimulus we apply to our bodies, so that way our body can be specific to the adaptation that we want, which is growing more muscle and getting bigger, getting jacked. So there are a couple drivers of muscle growth, and the most important driver of muscle growth is mechanical tension. So the actual tension on the muscle fibers, the tension going through your body when you're lifting some heavy ass weights. Mechanical tension is the most important driver and stimulus of muscle growth. It's important that to create enough mechanical tension in your workout, you're lifting pretty close to failure. You don't necessarily need to go to complete muscular failure all the time, but you want to stay within 1 to 3 reps. I oftentimes suggest for athletes to say 1 to 2 reps away from failure on all of your working sets if your goal is in muscle growth. Main reason being is because we want to recruit as many strong and powerful muscle fibers as we can. So there's this thing called the size principle. I think I talked about it a couple podcasts ago. But basically, the best example I can give for the size principle is like Lord of the Rings, So if Saruman is in his tower, the Tower of Isengard, and he's like, man, okay, I'm going to go take over the Shire, which is just a bunch of hobbits and farmers, not going to be that difficult. I don't need to send my biggest, baddest Urukai to the Shire to take it over. I could just send some orcs and goblins and they'll smoke those guys real easy because the effort required for that task really isn't that difficult. However, if I'm going to try to break through Helm's Deep and take out everybody over there, I got to send my biggest and baddest dudes. I'm going to send my Urukai. Your body works very similarly, where if I'm just going to pick up my phone, the amount of effort required to do that is so low. So I really don't have to recruit that many big, powerful muscle fibers to pick up something like my phone. If I'm going to pick up a 80-pound dumbbell, or if I'm going to pick up, a 300-pound barbell, or whatever the case may be, that is much more difficult. So my body then has to recruit bigger and more powerful muscle fibers. And that's why mechanical tension is so important, because when you have a ton of mechanical tension and you're getting close to failure, within 1 to 2 reps away from failure, you're recruiting a lot of those big and powerful muscle fibers. And that recruitment is part of what causes or stimulates a lot of muscle growth. So mechanical tension in your workouts is going to be very, very important. If you don't feel the mechanical tension, if you don't feel like when you're doing pull-ups, you don't feel, or rows, you don't feel the mechanical tension and stress in your lats, you only feel it in your biceps, well, it might be good for your biceps because your biceps are working really hard, but you got to make sure you're feeling the right mechanical tension in the right areas. Mechanical tension, biggest driver of muscle growth. The last 4 to 6 reps of the set that you're doing should be very, very difficult, and you should stay within 1 to 2 reps away from failure. So a practical example of what this would look like is, say you're doing a set of 10 on dumbbell bench press. You grab your warm-up weights and you warm up with 2 sets of 15, whatever, but then you start working up in weight. Your working set, at least as far as hypertrophy goes, your first working set is the first working set where you get 10 reps, and the last 4 to 6 reps are really, really difficult. And when you finish rep number 10, you think to yourself like, man, I could probably only do 1, maybe 2 more reps, and then I'm done. That is your first working set. So if a workout in the Strength Matrix training app or in the new upcoming Matt Jacked training course says, hey, you're going to do 4 sets of 10. Well, you just keep adding weight until you hit that feeling that you're supposed to feel for that set of 10. And that is set 1. That is so important. I see a lot of guys when they're training to build muscle, or maybe they've been in the gym for about a year and they're like, hey, Coach Jay, I'm really struggling to get jacked and I'm trying to get bigger. I'm eating more food, so I see the scale going up, but I don't really feel like I'm getting that much stronger. I don't really feel like I'm packing on muscle. I feel like I'm just getting fat. When I look at their training, it's pretty easy to see sometimes like, oh, like you're doing a lot of the right stuff, honestly, and I don't mean any disrespect, you're just not training hard enough. Like, get closer to failure. Like, send it pretty hard on a lot of those sets. Your working sets should be pretty damn difficult. So mechanical tension is key. Getting close to failure is key. The next driver of muscle growth, which the research is kind of split on this, is going to be metabolic stress. So metabolic stress adds to the stimulus signal of hypertrophy, and the easiest way to describe metabolic stress is like getting a crazy pump, getting that crazy burn sensation. This is the buildup of different metabolites like lactate, hydrogen ions, and phosphate. When you're doing a really, really hard set where you feel the burn in your biceps going crazy, that metabolic stress helps kind of, in a way, enhance the stimulus of muscle growth for that set. And that's only assuming that you have mechanical tension on there as well. Mechanical tension is first. If you don't have mechanical tension, I'm really hard pressed to believe that you're doing anything that's going to contribute to muscle growth. You might see a little bit of muscle growth for sure, but we're not trying to see a little bit of muscle growth. We're trying to see a lot of muscle growth. So mechanical tension is first. Next would be metabolic stress. So if you have a lot of mechanical tension and you got a crazy burn and a crazy pump, dude, it's pretty safe to say that that set is doing a lot of good when it comes to stimulating hypertrophy. The third thing that isn't necessarily a driver of muscle growth, but can sometimes be an indicator that the workout you did was a good training stimulus, is going to be muscle damage. A lot of times people back in the day, and probably some people still today, think that, oh, you go to the gym, you tear down your muscles, and then they build back up. And there is a little bit of truth to that, but that's not to say, I think where people kind of go wrong with that is that they end up chasing, okay, I'm just going to destroy my muscles as hard as I can to get a greater hypertrophy stimulus. And that isn't necessarily the case. You don't want to, you got to protect yourself before you wreck yourself, if you know what I'm saying. So muscle damage, or being, pretty sore after a hard workout, can be an indicator that you had a pretty good training session. That doesn't mean you need to be sore after every single workout to build muscle. That doesn't mean you need to be super sore, or just because you are sore, that doesn't mean that muscle growth is going to be achieved. A great example is when I first started running, my calves and my quads were pretty much always sore for like 6 months when I was running. And I was running for 45, 60 minutes. That's not just because I was sore in my calves and in my quads. That doesn't mean that my calves and quads are going to blow up and I'm going to look like Tom Platz. It just doesn't work that way. There's plenty of muscle damage. Wasn't that much mechanical tension, and there wasn't really a whole lot of metabolic stress in the way that would contribute to muscle growth. So those are the drivers of hypertrophy. Most important one being mechanical tension, like a secondary one or a good thing to pair mechanical tension with would be metabolic stress. And then over time, as you're training, if you find that you have like a little bit of soreness after your workouts, that's probably a good sign that you're getting a good training stimulus. But again, you don't necessarily want the soreness to get so out of hand that it ruins your recovery to do other things like jujitsu, or it ruins your recovery to get back in the gym and have another hard workout. You can almost think of it as like doing jujitsu. If you're exhausted and you're like on your back, your hands are over your head after jujitsu, you're like, man, like that was awesome. Like I feel like I pushed myself really good. Just because you're exhausted doesn't mean you did really good in that sparring round. You might have spent that entire sparring round in bottom mount and are just like completely gassed. So just because you're tired doesn't mean you did well in that sparring round. Just because you have a lot of muscle damage doesn't mean that you got the best hypertrophy stimulus possible from that training session. So we've talked about the drivers of muscle growth. We've talked about the different mistakes that I see a lot of grapplers make, but let's talk about how to actually train for muscle growth. What are the things that you need to do when it comes to the types of exercises you're doing, how much sets and reps you should do, how many days per week you should be training for muscle growth? Let's go ahead and break all of that down. So the first thing is going to be training volume. There's a lot of different studies out there that talk about training volume and how much volume is needed for muscle growth. Most of the studies and most of the research out there points to about this range of if you're doing 10 to 20 hard sets, like hard working sets for a given muscle group per week, you're in a good spot. So just as like a blanket statement or like as a general guideline, if your goal is to grow muscle, you want to get jacked, you got to do about 10 to 20 hard working sets for each muscle group per week. There's a lot of different ways you can go about that, which we'll get into here in a second, but that is the range. And one thing that I am a huge proponent of, and this is something that I picked up from the guys over at Renaissance Periodization, are these different things called volume landmarks. So there's a few different ones. There is minimum volume, which is like the minimum amount of training volume needed to just maintain, or they might even call it like maintenance volume. So for me, like I like to go back and forth between jiu-jitsu examples and lifting examples. For me, if I want to keep my grappling skills where they're at and just like stay sharp, not lose any of the skills I've been working on, my maintenance volume for jiu-jitsu is going to be 2 training sessions per week. If I'm doing at least 2 training sessions per week, I'm cruising. I know I'm doing good. If I go down to 1 training session per week or 0 training sessions per week, I feel like I'm always having to play catch up whenever I get back to jiu-jitsu. So even when like things right now with work and doing different things with the Strength Matrix training app are getting so busy and so crazy, I don't have a whole lot of time to train, but I know that, okay, to just maintain, I gotta be on the mat at least 2 days a week. Different athletes are gonna have different levels of maintenance volume. So for one athlete, they may only need about like 6 sets or 8 sets per week for a given muscle group to just maintain. Like if they do, say they need 6 sets per week to maintain their bicep size or whatever. So they do 3 really hard sets on Monday, 3 really hard sets on Thursday, and their biceps are just maintaining. If they want to grow, they have to move that up a little bit. So maintenance volume, however much work is needed to just maintain. Next volume landmark is going to be your minimal effective volume. And that is kind of like the minimum amount of volume you need to start to see some positive progress. It's not going to be the most optimized amount of progress. It's not going to be like, firing on all cylinders, all gas, no brakes, but it's enough to stimulate some growth. It's enough to help you move forward in whatever you're doing. So in jiu-jitsu, for me, I know that if I go to jiu-jitsu 3 days a week or get on the mat 3 days a week, that's my minimum effective volume. I can see that over the years, when I was able to go 3 times a week, my skills continued to progress upwards. Now, in the gym, it's going to look a little bit different. There are some people where 10 hard sets per muscle group per week, that is their minimum effective volume. If they do 10 hard sets per muscle group per week, they see a nice, steady incline. They could be doing a lot more, but staying at 10 is enough to see things moving forward in the right direction. And there may be even differences between muscle groups for you as an individual. You might find that like, hey, my minimum effective volume for my biceps is 10 sets. My minimum effective volume for my hamstrings is 12 sets or 13 sets, whatever the case may be. And it can be really difficult to find out like, well, man, like, do I need 10 sets per week or do I need 11 sets per week? And honestly, the best way to figure all that stuff out is to follow a training program, test it out, and see what your results were, and then move on to the next training program, or take what you learned from that training program, make some changes, and then try it again. You gotta get in the lab or the gym and test this stuff out. I think there's a huge problem nowadays with As, as much as I love social media, and I have to credit social media a lot for the success I've had in business, because I did a lot of stuff with social media, which ended up doing well and helped get the message out to more people. Unfortunately, I think one of the downsides of social media is that people end up delegating delegating information all to someone else, and they kind of become a little bit of an NPC, where they're waiting on their favorite influencer, they're waiting on their favorite athlete to tell them what to do, as opposed to just going about it through trial and error, getting in the lab, getting in the gym, getting on the mat, and testing some of these things out. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, Coach Jay, I got you. Like, I need mechanical tension, I need metabolic stress, and got to do 10 to 20 sets, hard sets per week and stuff, but how many should I do? Like, how do I know what my minimum effective volume is? My answer is going to be, you got to figure it out. You got to test it out. Start at 10 sets, see how it goes. Don't see any growth happen on 10 sets per week? Well, maybe bump it up to 12 sets. See what happens. So that's minimum effective volume. The next volume landmark that's important to look at is going to be max adaptable volume. So this is kind of like the sweet spot. This is like the most optimized amount of volume that you can be doing. So the jiu-jitsu example for me is, if I want to make like the most amount of progress possible in jiu-jitsu without hitting the ceiling of my recovery, I got to go to jiu-jitsu 5 days a week. I got to step on the mat, roll semi-hard, don't need to go balls to the wall every single day, but doing sparring, 5 days a week. That's what it is for me. For certain athletes, when it comes to muscle growth, their max adaptable volume, like their sweet spot, may be 16 sets. So they're kind of in the middle of that 10 to 20 set recommendation based on what the research says. And, for them, like, hey, if I'm doing 16 sets, hard sets per body part per week, I'm good. Like, I got a great consistent rate of muscle growth. I'm making good progress. Everything's moving in the right direction. I'm still able to recover just fine. We are golden. Now, the next volume landmark and the final one is going to be your max recoverable volume. And it's important that we all, find out what that is, where we hit that limit of like, hey, this was my limit. When I go over this limit, I really struggle with recovery. I feel really banged up, might even like start getting a little sick. If I stay below this or like flirt with the edge, I'm solid. I'm A1. So in the context of jiu-jitsu, for me, I found that my max recoverable volume for jiu-jitsu is 6 training sessions per week. If I go to jiu-jitsu Monday through Saturday, that's a lot of work, man. And I can recover from that, but I don't really have much room to recover from anything else. I can't do double sessions during that week. I can't go again on Sunday. Like, when I go over those 6 hard grappling sessions per week, when I go beyond that, I start to crash and burn. So for someone, 20 hard sets of legs per week might be their max recoverable volume, where it's like, man, like, I'm always feeling a little sore. I'm always feeling a little fatigued. I can get through it. It's tough, but I'm hanging on by a thread. If I start doing 21, 22, 23 hard sets of legs per week, I start to crash and burn. So what's important is that you understand your minimums and your maximums. There's a great strength coach out there. Hopefully, he'll be on the podcast one of these days. His name's Travis Mash. He's a elite level world record holder in powerlifting. He is, I believe he has elite numbers in Olympic weightlifting, and he's the coach of the junior national and maybe even the senior national Olympic weightlifting team. He's coached weightlifters to the Olympics. He's coached weightlifters to all-time world records. Like, he's an amazing, fantastic coach. And one thing that he learned, I think from the Russians, or maybe he learned it from the Bulgarians, either the Russian Olympic weightlifting team or the Bulgarian weightlifting team, where the 4 essentials that you need to be successful in this sport. And I think this doesn't just apply to weightlifting. I think this applies to any sport, anything, honestly, anything in life. First one is going to be your minimums. You got to have minimums. You got to have standards for yourself of minimums of like, hey, if I dip below this standard, something's going wrong. So in the context of weightlifting, they might say like, hey, I need to always be able to squat, 400 pounds. If I can't squat 400 pounds on that day, like, I must be sick. I might be injured or something. Something is wrong, and I need to assess what's going on, because on any given day, I should be able to walk into the gym, load up 4 plates, bury that ass to grass, and stand up and be totally fine. If I can't do that, that's a problem. Now, you also need to know where your maximums are at. These are all your PRs or your personal records. Like, hey, at a minimum, I need to always be able to just walk into the gym and squat 400 at a minimum. But my current PR is like 600 or 615, and I'm chasing to get a little bit more out of that PR so I can squat 650, 660, whatever the case may be. Now, these are all numbers that are specific to like the best weightlifters in the world. I definitely don't think that there's any jiu-jitsu athlete currently that's competitive that can squat 600 pounds. If they can, holler at me. I'd love to see it. I think that'd be freaking awesome. But to drive the point home, you got to know what your minimums and your maximums are. The other 2 key variables that they talked about were you got to have good training partners. This is super important for jiu-jitsu guys. I know we're kind of moving off topic a little bit in terms of hypertrophy training for jiu-jitsu, but you got to have good training partners. Like I said in last week's episode, jiu-jitsu and wrestling and MMA are the ultimate team sport. You can't get good at any of those without training partners. You can try to do all the grappling dummy drills you want. That's not going to make you better at jiu-jitsu. I don't believe it makes you better at jiu-jitsu. You can do as much shadow wrestling as you want in your room by yourself. That's not going to make you a world-class wrestler. You got to have training partners. So know your minimums, know your maximums, have good training partners. And then this is what Travis Smash said. He said that the 4th thing that they talked about was PEDs. You got to make sure you got a good concoction of PEDs. And so Travis took that and he's like, oh, I don't know if I want to encourage all my junior weightlifters to subscribe to that. So he changed it and said, you got to have a strong mindset, which I think is great. Like, you definitely need to have a strong mindset. The reason why I brought all that up is because you do need to know where your minimums and your maximums are when it comes to strength training, when it comes to rolling hard on the mat, especially in the context of strength training for hypertrophy. You got to know what your minimums are at, your minimum effective volume, or the minimum amount of work that needs to be done so you can see positive progress and positive growth. Because the data says that 10 to 20 hard working sets per muscle group per week is what's great for muscle growth, it's probably a safe guess to say that most people's minimum effective volume is around 10 to 11 hard sets per muscle group per week. Now, you also need to know your maximums. You need to know where your max adaptive volume is, like that sweet spot where you feel fantastic, you're able to keep getting stronger from week to week, and you're also able to successfully recover enough so that you're able to roll hard on the mat. You need to know what that is. You also need to know what your max recoverable volume is. What is your ceiling? If your ceiling is really low, you need to either implement better recovery practices or get in better shape. In the conditioning episode that I did 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I talked about how as your aerobic base improves and as that base level of fitness or your general physical preparedness increases, the more work that you can do. Do more, be more, right? The more that you do, the more that you can handle. So if you feel like, man, like I can only do 12 hard sets of hypertrophy work per muscle group each week, anything more than that, I'm cooked. It's like, well, you don't have much wiggle room. You got to get in better shape to be able to handle some more training. You also need to work on your recovery, so that way you can recover faster and make time throughout the week to get in a little bit more work done. So that is training volume. You want to make sure that if you're training to build muscle and get jacked for jiu-jitsu, a good recommendation or a good range based on what the current research shows is about 10 to 20 hard working sets per muscle group per week. Now, how often should you do that? Well, I'm a firm believer that you should be going to the gym and lifting heavy as many days as you can, each and every single week, just as long as it doesn't negatively impact your overall jiu-jitsu training. Now, for most athletes that I've coached over the last 8.5 years, that falls usually between 2 to 4 workouts per week. The guys that are doing a lot more jiu-jitsu training, the guys that are training for ADCC trials, Master Worlds, and all that stuff, they don't have as much time per week to be going to the gym or even the recovery capacity to be going to the gym 4 days a week. So they're only in the gym 2 to 3 days a week. For someone like myself, where I'm right now, I only do 2 grappling sessions per week. So I'm going to the gym all the time. I'm going to the gym at least 3 times a week, most weeks probably 4 times a week. So that range of going to the gym as many days as you can, just as long as it doesn't negatively impact your grappling training, that range happens to fall for most athletes I've coached 2 to 4 workouts per week. Now across those workouts, you want to hit each muscle group about 2, maybe even 3 times per week. Some muscle groups take a little bit longer to recover from, so you may only have time to hit them twice a week. Some muscle groups recover a lot faster, so you could probably hit them upwards of 3 times per week. The reason why you want to spread out how many times you're training a given muscle group and where you're splitting up those 10 to 20 hard working sets is because splitting up the total of 10 to 20 sets per week helps spread out some of the intensity. So one example we have is if you are doing 18 working sets per week, you have the option of doing 6 exercises, 3 sets each. So say you're doing back, you got pull-ups, you got rows, you follow it up with dumbbell pullovers, then you do some like 1-arm dumbbell rows, then you do single arm lat pull downs, and then say you do like a hammer strength row or something like that. You do 6 back exercises in one workout, and you do 3 really hard sets for all of those exercises. You can do that once a week, or you can split up the intensity and you can do 3 back exercises for 3 working sets, and you can do those on 2 separate days. Now, the first option where you do all 6 exercises in one workout, you are probably going to be able to go pretty hard in the paint on exercises 1, 2, 3, maybe even exercise number 4. But those last 2 exercises, you're going to be so tired and so fatigued from all the work you've already done, it's going to be hard to get a good training stimulus out of those last 2 exercises. You're just not going to be able to push it as hard as you possibly could. So if you separate them, where you only do 3 back exercises on one day and then 3 more back exercises on another day, that means all 6 of those exercises and all of those working sets, you get to bring enough intensity, enough effort into all of those, as opposed to if you just put it all in one training day. It's kind of like, if you're following condensed conjugate, it's like, yeah, we are blending max effort and dynamic effort in the same day, but we're not doing max effort upper and lower in the same day and then also doing dynamic effort upper and lower. Like, we would just experience so much fatigue that the stuff we do at the second half or like the last 30% of the workout, we wouldn't be able to get much benefit out of it because we're just so tired. So spreading out those 10 to 20 working sets across 2 to 3 workouts per week is a pretty good sweet spot or a pretty good way of kind of spreading out some of that intensity so you can get the most amount of training stimulus possible and the right amount of recovery to help you between those hard training sessions. Now, when it comes to training intensity, we can look at it a couple different ways. There's training intensity in the context of, okay, how close are we getting to your absolute 1 rep max? So, we talk about the max effort method, and that training is very intense in the sense that, like, yeah, we are getting close to 100% of your max, like the max that you can do for that day. A workout that calls, say you're doing Zercher box squats, and for easy math, say that your 1 rep max Zercher box squat is 300 pounds, and you do 90% of that, which off the top of my head, I think that's 270. So you do 270 pounds, which is 90% of your all-time max. That's pretty intense. If you did 50%, so you did a Zercher box squat at 150 pounds, it'd be a lot easier. So that's one way we can look at intensity. We can also look at intensity just in how close are we getting to failure and how much effort are we putting into each set. So you may pick an exercise like lat pull downs. You might not know what your 1 rep max lat pull down is, but you do a set of 10, and that 10th rep, you're like, geez, gosh, man, like that was so freaking tough. I don't even think I might be able to do 1 more rep. That's a pretty intense set. We don't know what your 1 rep max is, and if you're able to do 10 reps, then that's pretty far away from your 1 rep max, but you did get right up to the edge of muscular failure where you only got 1 more rep left in the tank. That's pretty intense. So when we look at intensity, we have to look at the different rep ranges that we kind of have to focus on building muscle. And the rep ranges on what a lot of the data suggests that are great for building muscle, or you get a pretty decent hypertrophy stimulus, is pretty broad. You can go as low as 5 reps per set to help stimulate muscle growth, and you can go as high as 30 reps per set to stimulate muscle growth. Now, that's a pretty big range, and within that range, there are different secondary benefits to kind of where you're at in that range. So if you're doing lots of heavy sets of 5 to 6 reps for muscle growth, that's great. That's also going to have a great strength stimulus. If you're doing a lot of sets of 25 to 30 reps per set, that's also going to stimulate muscle growth, but definitely not going to stimulate strength. It's going to lean more on the side of further helping promote local muscular endurance and work capacity. So both of those extremes in that range of 5 to 30 reps can work just as long as you're taking them really close to failure, just as long as the intensity is high, as long as you're putting in tons of effort into each one of those sets. So if you're doing a heavy set of 5 to 6 reps, it should be pretty heavy where you're only leaving like 1 rep in the tank or just a little bit left in the tank on each set. If you're doing a set of 30, that 30th rep should be extremely difficult to complete. Like you got to take that thing like right up to the edge and start flirting with failure a little bit. When we are designing hypertrophy focused workouts, we have to make sure that we're using a good blend of both, especially as grappling athletes. We want the intensity to be high, but we can't just do sets of 5 for everything because that may not always be practical. Sets of 5 work really well for big compound lifts. They can sometimes be a little uncomfortable for isolation movements. So for example, for me, I love doing heavy bench press for sets of 5. That feels really good. However, doing heavy sets of 5 for a tricep isolation exercise like push downs or skull crushers, it just crushes my elbows. It just adds more issues than for what it's worth as far as elbow pain goes. But if I do sets of 15 and I take those to failure on tricep push downs or skull crushers, my elbows feel fine. So the common thread is that we want to take things pretty close to failure, staying within 1 to 2 reps away from failure, regardless if we're doing 5 reps per set or 30 reps per set. And we got to make sure that that is consistent with whatever exercise we're doing, with whatever type of workout we're doing, because that intensity, getting that close to failure, is going to recruit a ton of mechanical tension, hit those big, powerful muscle fibers. And remember, that is the biggest driver of muscle growth. That's the biggest driver of hypertrophy. That's going to be mechanical tension. So that's got to be in all your workouts. It's got to be one of the constants. Now, when you're looking at different rep ranges or different reps per set, there's this thing called like the time efficient compromise. So you can build muscle doing 1 rep maxes. Like that creates the most amount of mechanical tension. The problem with that is that it's really tough to get in enough volume to stimulate positive muscle growth. It's just really tough. You'd be in the gym for like 6 hours and you might even struggle to even get enough reps to stimulate a ton of muscle growth. You could also do sets sets as high as 50 reps, yet doing 50 reps per set, all those sets just take forever. And those first 45 reps you're not really getting much out of those as far as muscle growth goes. You're getting some out of muscular endurance, but it's not great. And so that's why the range, when people make these suggestions of like, what are the best ranges for muscle growth, they start to shrink a little bit where, even in some of the research I did, some people say like, hey, just stick with 6 to 20. Like if you're doing 6 reps on squats, yeah, you're gonna build some monster legs. If you're doing set to 20 on dumbbell bench, you're gonna build some big pecs and big triceps. They got some different benefits in there, but you kind of have this thing called the time efficient compromise. It may be a little bit more efficient to do sets of 10 for a given exercise because you don't have to take as many warm-up sets, so you don't have to rest as long between sets because it's not so taxing like a true 5 rep maxes, and it may also just feel a little bit better on your joints. And the last thing that I wanted to mention about how to actually train for muscle growth is exercise selection. There's a huge variety on the different exercises that you can do as long as those main drivers of hypertrophy are being respected: mechanical tension and metabolic stress. If you're getting a ton of mechanical tension and you're getting a crazy pump, regardless of the exercise, it's a pretty safe bet that you're doing a good job at stimulating muscle growth. So you can use barbells, you can use machines, you can use dumbbells, kettlebells, a whole bunch of body weight stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do. Now, within that, when it comes to exercise selection, there's a lot of research that shows that working through a larger range of motion tends to have a better overall training stimulus for hypertrophy and leads to greater muscle growth than exercises with a shorter range of motion. So I'm a big fan of box squats, but I know that if I want to build my legs to be as big and as jacked as possible, box squats are not going to be as beneficial to that goal compared to full range of motion ass to grass squats. Doing something like a floor press, which is one of my favorite exercises for building strength for grapplers, is not going to be the best hypertrophy exercise when we can do something that works through a larger range of motion, like dumbbell bench press. So just keep that in mind. As you guys are going through your hypertrophy workouts and you're trying to set up your training, you want to get your 10 to 20 hard working sets per muscle group per week. And of those hard working sets, you want to use exercises that train the muscle through a large range of motion. So deep bench presses, deep squats, deep lunges, rows and pulling exercises where you get a big stretch on the lats and then you squeeze really hard with your elbows behind your back at the top. If you're working through a full range of motion and you're putting a ton of mechanical tension on the muscle and you're getting a ton of metabolic stress by way of getting a crazy pump, those are some great signs that you're stimulating a lot of muscle growth. Before I move on to part 4 of what you need to do to maximize and get jacked as a grappler, I did want to talk about the free training course I have inside my app called Grappler Accelerator. There's over 2,000 athletes that are in this training course right now, and they're absolutely loving it. And I really designed this training course to help you kickstart your own grappling athleticism. You may be listening to this podcast and saying like, Coach Jay, like I hear everything you're saying, but I still feel kind of lost on how to actually apply this to my own training and actually go into the gym and use the things that you're talking about. That's why I built the Strength Matrix training app, so that way you can take back control of your training. And there's a free training course in there called Grappler Accelerator. It comes with everything you need to get started on enhancing your grappling athleticism. It comes with a complete strength and conditioning program, simple and clean diet guide, my super sleep toolkit, and some different recovery protocols that you can use to feel and perform your best both in the gym and on the mat. And if you want to check that out, you can go to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler, or you can just click the link in the description below and I'll walk you through the steps on how to get access to that free training course. And with all that being said, let's move into part 4 on what you need to get jacked to multiply your muscle so you can multiply your hustle on the mat as a grappling athlete. And that's going to be nutrition. Nutrition is if mechanical tension is the biggest driver of hypertrophy, I think you could almost say that nutrition is equally the biggest driver of hypertrophy, because if you do all that mechanical tension and create all that stress and that training stimulus, but you don't properly replenish your body with the nutrients required for growth, it's going to be pretty tough to pack on slabs of muscle. So nutrition for hypertrophy, made very, very simple. You got 3 main macronutrients: protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Protein is going to be most important because that is going to really help with the recovery from all the training that you're doing. And an easy way to make sure you're getting in plenty of protein is just to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight every single day. You want to split up that total amount of protein into about 3 to 4 different meals. And it's a good idea to have a decent amount of protein, about 25% of your protein intake, after that big hypertrophy workout. So that way you can immediately kickstart that recovery process, begin rebuilding and recovering from that training session, so then that way you can make adaptations, build muscle, and get jacked. Next macronutrient is going to be carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are an amazing fuel source for a lot of the training that you do in the gym and on the mat. And you want to make sure you're getting in enough carbohydrates to fuel the workouts that you're doing, as well as kind of replenish those glycogen stores. So that way, if you're going to jiu-jitsu later in the day, you have energy to be able to roll hard later in the day. Having carbohydrates is also really important for providing your body energy to recover. If you do a really, really hard workout and then you only eat protein, that's great, right on, but your body also is going to be using energy to go through the recovery process. So you also got to make sure you're replenishing the energy that it needs so that way it can recover effectively. The next macronutrient is going to be fat. Fat is essential for different parts of your hormone production and just overall health. And so you don't want to go to any extreme in any direction on these macronutrients. You don't want to go all protein, no carbohydrates, no fat. That would be a problem. You don't want to go all protein, all fat, and no carbohydrates. That also would be a problem. And you definitely don't want to go all protein or carbohydrates and have zero fat. That is going to be a huge problem. So you want to have a good balance of both. The way I look at it is if you're getting 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight every single day, that kind of covers that. Then what you do with your carbohydrates and fat is really going to depend on your overall eating preferences and your overall training goals. If your goal is to pack on slabs of muscle, you got to be in a little bit of a caloric surplus, about 250 to 500 calories of a surplus per day. And that surplus can come from any combination of carbohydrates and fat. For me personally, and with what I've seen with all the athletes that I coach, I have found that things work best when your protein stays consistent at 1 gram per pound of body weight. Your fat intake is fairly low, but still in a good healthy range. So about 0.3 grams to 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. And then you just fill in the rest of your calories for the day with carbohydrates. So for me right now, off the top of my head, I think I'm having like 170 grams of protein, or no, 175 grams of protein. I think I'm getting in like 336 grams of carbohydrates and 52 or maybe like 56 grams of fat per day. Those are my macros. So moderate protein, pretty high carb, low-ish fat, so to speak. That's what I found to work best, because that way I have plenty of carbs to fuel the training that I'm doing in the gym and on the mat. I got plenty of protein to recover from all that, and I got enough healthy fats in there to make sure that my body can still do what it needs to do, producing hormones and all that good stuff. Now, there's going to be a lot more information about nutrition as far as meal timing and all of that stuff, and I put a lot of that information inside the Strength Matrix training app. Inside our education portal, we have a lesson in there that's all about hypertrophy, and I pretty much map out a complete meal plan for everything you need to do if you're going to lift heavy and roll hard in the same day, and your goal is to maximize muscle growth. And the other thing that's about nutrition that we're not going to talk about today, because that's like a whole nother can of worms, is supplements. There's a lot of different supplements that you can take that can enhance your muscle growth, that can improve your recovery from the really hard hypertrophy workouts that you're doing and the hard training that you're doing on the mat. And inside that masterclass that I do in the Strength Matrix training app, we go over supplements as well. So if you want to check that out, that's where it's at. All right. So when I announced that I was building the hypertrophy podcast series that I'm doing right now and the new hypertrophy training course called Mat Jacked, which is dropping hopefully in the next couple weeks, I got a ton of questions. And one of the big questions that I got, probably like the most common one, was how to fit hypertrophy training within your grappling schedule. So like I said, most athletes that I work with lift either 2 to 4 times per week, and that's a pretty good safe spot to stay within. Now, the amount of jiu-jitsu training that you're doing is going to dictate how many times you can go to the gym. If you're doing like 6 jiu-jitsu training sessions per week, that means you're going to have to lift heavy and roll hard in the same day. You could probably only do that twice a week. If you're someone like me, where I only go to jiu-jitsu twice a week right now, I can just do 1 training session a day and lift 3 to 4 times a week and be totally fine. So it's just going to depend. But the biggest thing to look at is you want to get the best training stimulus possible for the session that you're doing, and then make sure you have enough recovery so that way you can hit it hard again. So if your goal is to build muscle, your goal is to get jacked, that means that, okay, well, we got to make sure that when we go into each workout, we're at least recovered enough to have a really good workout. If you say you lift heavy and you roll hard on Monday, awesome. Tuesday, you're probably gonna be pretty fatigued. And if you try to do another high intensity, really hard hypertrophy workout on Tuesday, you're gonna be going into that workout behind the 8 ball a little bit. You're gonna be going into that workout a little under recovered. You're gonna be going into that workout in a little bit of a fatigued state, and you're not gonna be able to get the most out of that workout. So what I suggest for most of my athletes is, hey, if you're gonna lift heavy and roll hard on Monday, let's make Tuesday a lighter day. That way your body has a little bit more time to recover, so that way you can hit the gym hard and get the most out of that workout on Wednesday. Some people call this the high-low method. I've also heard people call it, and I can't remember who I stole this from, but they called it the 48 to 72 hour rule, where you separate your hardest and highest stimulus training sessions by about 48 to 72 hours. Instead of doing like hard workout, next day hard jujitsu, next day hard workout, next day hard jujitsu. Every single day you're doing something super, super intense. If you want to be able to get the most amount of benefit out of the training sessions that you're doing and make the most amount of progress possible, it's a good idea to look at it in the sense of like, okay, this is a high stimulus training day or a high stimulus training session. The next high stimulus workout or grappling session that I do is going to be 48 to 72 hours later. It doesn't always perfectly match up to be 48 to 72 hours, but do the best you can in trying to separate those high stimulus sessions by about 48 to 72 hours. Now, remember, it's not about what you do in the gym or on the mat that leads to progress. It's about what you do and can recover from. Recovery is going to be the most even more than mechanical tension, recovery, I'd say, is even more important when it comes to being able to pack on slabs of muscle. There was a period of time where I was doing all the right stuff. I was definitely doing 10 to 20 working sets per week. I was working through a full range of motion. I was getting good pumps. I mean, kind of. I had like a ton of mechanical tension on the muscle and all that stuff. But I wasn't really seeing much muscle growth. And that was because my recovery was super dookie. I wasn't getting plenty of sleep. My diet wasn't locked in. And my training schedule was honestly just kind of a wreck. And so recovery is going to be a huge driver of muscle growth. Remember, in the beginning of the episode, we talked about the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. Stimulus is the workout. Recovery is what's responsible in getting you out of that fatigue ditch and helping your body make the adaptation to build more muscle, get stronger, all that good stuff. So there are 3 keys to recovery that I harp on all the time and that I talk about all the time. I think I've mentioned it almost in every single podcast episode, and that's going to be sleep. Make sure you're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, not just the quantity of sleep, 7 to 8 hours, but making sure that you're getting the highest quality of sleep across those 7 to 8 hours. And sleep is so important. I wanted to make sure that anyone that listens to this podcast can start immediately, like tonight, getting better sleep. So that's why the Super Sleep Toolkit is 100% free in the Strength Matrix training app. It's part of the Grappler Accelerator training course. Once you get that training course, you can download the Super Sleep Toolkit. It has every single method, tactic, everything that I've found over the last several years on how to get the best amount of sleep possible. So if you're struggling with recovery, start with that. Start by dialing in your sleep first. Even if you can't sleep like a full 8 hours, because for whatever reason, you got a newborn, you got a crazy work schedule that impacts some of that, there are still things that you can do to improve your sleep. So I strongly suggest that you check out that free resource, the Super Sleep Toolkit. Next up is going to be nutrition. We kind of already talked about it, but again, just to drive the point home, nutrition is not just important for fueling your body to have good training sessions in the gym and on the mat. It's also massively important for providing your body with the proper nutrients that are required to help you recover and make those adaptations that you want in building more muscle, getting more jacked. So you got to make sure your nutrition's on point. And then lastly, training schedule. Training schedule, what I just mentioned, if you have a poorly structured training schedule, you're not going to have that much time for recovery. If you have a poorly structured training schedule, you're going to be going into a lot of these workouts and a lot of these training sessions feeling pretty banged up and pretty fatigued. And it's kind of like driving with the e-brake on. You can probably still drive and get around, but you're not going to be able to drive very fast, and you're going to be putting a lot of extra wear and tear and damage on your vehicle. So optimize your recovery by focusing on these 3 things: sleep, nutrition, and training schedule. We did have some other questions that came in from the Lift Heavy Roll Hard Grappling Club when it comes to hypertrophy. First question was from Saleh_Cornell. I want to go 1 or 2 weight classes up, how to do it fast and not gain much fat. Quick answer is you don't. You don't do it fast. If you try to gain weight fast, you're probably just going to get fat. Building muscle is a skill, and building muscle takes time. I suggest for most athletes, if your goal is to move up a weight class, go about it very, very, very slowly, because you want to be able to maximize muscle growth and minimize fat gain. The whole reason why you would want to go up a weight class is so you can be stronger, right? Like that's the whole point. You wouldn't want to just, be like, you know what, I'm just going to step on the scale with a weight vest just so I can, be in a bigger weight class. It's like, what benefit does that give you? It gives you nothing. So you can't flex bone, you can't flex fat, you can only flex muscle. So if you try to do like a dirty bulk and just get way bigger and try to move up 1 or 2 weight classes in a month or 2 months, you are essentially just putting a weight vest on and saying, okay, I'm here to compete, let's see how I do. If you take the time, like 6 months to a year, of gradually every week doing the right stuff with your nutrition, doing the right stuff with your training, where you're actually putting on some quality muscle tissue, that's going to be so much better for your overall performance in those heavier weight classes, as opposed to just dirty bulking and putting on a bunch of fat. The goal, as far as how much weight would be like a safe measure of growth without getting too crazy, would be about 0.5% to 1% of your body weight, or of your average body weight, in increase each and every single week. So for me, when I started my last bulk, I weighed 158 pounds. And so I just rounded that up to 160, so to speak. So I was aiming for 0.5% to 1% in average weight gain each week. So that meant I weighed myself every single day, and from week to week, I wanted to gain about 0.8 pounds to 1.6 pounds in average body weight per week. And I was able to maintain that for quite a while. I'll fully admit it. I did get a little sloppy like the last 2 months of my bulk, so I'm definitely not as lean as I would like to be. So I'm going to be leaning out here pretty soon. But for a while, I was able to pack on like a lot of just good size. However much of that was actual contractile muscle tissue versus, there's myofibular hypertrophy, where you increase the size of the actual muscle fibers, and the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, where you increase the fluid and the swelling of the muscle, which that has benefits as well. It's hard to say like exactly how much of the 20 pounds that I put on is myofibular hypertrophy versus sarcoplasmic versus just a little bit of water weight and all that stuff. But the goal and the intention of saying this remains the same. Like, you want to have a nice, slow, progressive rate of body weight increase, because that's going to do so much better for you than if you just do a dirty bulk, gain a bunch of fat, and then try to compete in a higher weight class. Next question from Daniel_Brotherhood. Hypertrophy gives muscle and strength, but feel making slow and stiff. Thoughts about this? So, one thing that I'm going to be talking about a ton in the upcoming Matt Jacked training course is this thing called athletic hypertrophy. The principles of hypertrophy are pretty much the same for every athlete. Like, as long as you got good mechanical tension, as long as you're getting a crazy pump, and including some good metabolic stress, you're going to be packing on some good muscle. However, how that increase in muscle mass translates to your athleticism can be very different, and there's a lot of variety in that. You can train like a bodybuilder, like follow a classic bodybuilding program. That doesn't mean that all of that muscle mass that you build and all of that muscle mass that you get is going to be able to be maximally used to contribute to your athleticism. You have to train in a very specific way. You have to set up and organize your hypertrophy training program in a way that still maintains and continues to build on some of those other athletic qualities. I've talked about this before, about how, your body doesn't work like a button machine. You don't just push the hypertrophy button and say like, okay, hypertrophy button, let's build muscle. It doesn't really work that way. It works a lot more, if you can picture this in your mind, of like switchers and dials that you can push up and push down. You can turn up and you can turn down. So when you're training for hypertrophy, hypertrophy is only one aspect of athleticism. Speed, explosive power, absolute strength, conditioning, all of that stuff are other athletic qualities that are important to have as a grappler. And so you can push up that hypertrophy dial pretty high, but you also got to make sure that you're not simultaneously pulling all the other athletic qualities down. And there's a lot of different things that you can do with that, and that's something I'm going to be going over in the upcoming training course, Matt Jacked, here in a couple weeks. So if you're feeling slow and stiff, Daniel, but you feel strong, you feel like you've packed on some good muscle, congrats, that's awesome. Just start introducing a little bit more athletic stuff into your training. Don't lose your ability to jump. Don't lose your ability to sprint. Don't lose your conditioning. Still focus on building muscle, but just make sure you're also including some of those other athletic things in there as well. Next question from Abe Sickers. To get jacked for your sport, can you do it during a calorie deficit phase? Thanks. So depends on how you're going to define jacked. Can you get jacked in the sense that you can look bigger, you can aesthetically look jacked in a calorie deficit? 100%. Are you going to have a lot of success building more contractile tissue in a calorie deficit? Unless you're like a complete beginner, probably not. So I think it's important that we get real specific when we talk about like, hey, like I can lose fat and build muscle at the same time. And it's like, okay, how do you know that you're doing that? Did you get a DEXA scan? Did you see that you increased in contractile muscle tissue? Because if you didn't, but you aesthetically look better, which is great, we don't want to conflate the two as like, oh, I lost all this body fat and I look better, so that must mean I built muscle. It's like you might have gotten more jacked aesthetically. You might have improved your ability to store glycogen within the muscle. You might have been able to lose body fat to where you see a lot more definition coming through in your physique and all that stuff. But that doesn't automatically mean that you added a lot more contractile tissue. So newbies, people who are like brand new to the gym, can build some contractile tissue a little bit and decrease body fat and kind of do both simultaneously. So it can work a little bit for beginners, but pretty much once you're no longer a beginner after about like 6 months, you don't really see that anymore. You kind of have to be a little bit more specific with like, hey, this is the time where I'm being very specific and trying to add on more contractile tissue by being in a caloric surplus. This is the time where I'm trying to decrease body fat by being in a calorie deficit. Next question from that boy Alex. What's good, Alex? How much muscle that will be meant to perform rather than look good at the beach? Or I'm sorry, how to build muscle that will be meant to perform rather than to look good at the beach. Dude, this is 100% the sole focus of the upcoming Matt Jacked training course. Everything about that training course is about athletic hypertrophy. How do you build muscle that contributes to you performing better as an athlete on the mat, as opposed to only training for aesthetics? For myself, this is something that was like a big culture shock for me because I came into jiu-jitsu from bodybuilding. Like 2 months, or no, maybe like 4 months before I started jiu-jitsu, I got all tan and oiled up, and I stood in my swim trunks on stage and was hitting those poses as a bodybuilder. I only did one bodybuilding show, so I can't like say like, oh, I'm a competitive bodybuilder, because that'd be a stretch. But I did go through the full thing. Like I was like, dimple bellied out at the start of prep, and I got super lean and had ab veins and all that stuff. I did the spray tan and I did the whole thing. And I trained in a very specific way to get to that state. I was really, really lean. I was in really good shape. I thought I looked great. But then I went and started doing jiu-jitsu, and I very quickly found that, oh, the training that I was doing to look that shredded and be that lean on stage, some of that kind of helps with jiu-jitsu, but there's a lot of other stuff that I'm missing that I need to work on, that I need to build my athleticism for jiu-jitsu. So how you do that comes from how you're balancing and leveraging the different areas of your athleticism. You can definitely work on the area of hypertrophy and do a lot of training that achieves the goal of mechanical tension and metabolic stress. But you can achieve those two things while also improving your ability to have rotational explosive power, to build your absolute strength, to be able to sprint, to be able to jump, to be able to have a gas tank and a really good engine so that way you don't get tired on the mat. So, and a lot of that comes from, honestly, Alex, a lot of that comes from just being intentional about mixing that more into your training. So that way you're not leaning too hard in any one direction. And it can be tough to mix that into your training in the most productive way that allows you to optimize your muscle growth. And that's really what the Mat Jacket training course is going to be all about. So when that drops, hopefully within the next couple weeks, sign up for that. And if you got other questions, I'll be there to help you out inside the Strength Matrix training app. All right, last question from Shekels. How often to change exercises on specific muscle groups? It really depends. Typically, you start to run into some accommodation after about 4 to 6 weeks of running the same exercise. So in week 1, you say you do 50 pounds on an exercise. Week 2, you're like, man, this feels pretty good. I'm using 60s. Week 3, 70s. Week 4, like, man, I'm feeling great. I'm going to try to, slang some 80s. Around week 5, if you don't either rotate exercises or do something to allow your body to recover a little bit, you're going to run into a little bit of a wall. It doesn't always happen in week 5, but on average tends to happen around week 5. Where like, man, like I was doing 80s, but for some reason today I just feel like I can barely do the 80s. What that means is that your body's just making accommodations, it's accommodating to the stimulus that you've provided it. And once it accommodates to the stimulus that you've provided it, you need to find a new stimulus to create more stimulus and produce greater adaptations. So for me personally, I love to just run everything on a 3-week pendulum wave. So I'm basically rotating exercises every 3 weeks. I might do exercises that are very, very similar, but have like a little slight nuance. So for example, like I might run dumbbell bench press for 3 weeks, and then the next 3 weeks, I might do a slight incline dumbbell bench press. So it's a same movement pattern, same training tool, but it's changed just enough to help me get a little bit different of a training stimulus. That's how I like to do it, every 3 weeks or so. However, you can take it, up to like every 4 weeks or maybe every 5 weeks. If you're doing it every 6 weeks, just make sure you're tracking specifically how well you're making progress in that exercise. And you basically want to rotate exercises right before the point at which you stop making progress. And then that's pretty much it. So for me, that's every 3 weeks. And it also makes it easy for the athletes that I coach, where we just rotate in new exercises every 3 weeks. And I found that helps just psychologically help break up some of the monotony. If I had to do the exact same workout for 6 weeks in a row, I'd lose my mind. But if I do the same workout 3 weeks in a row, and then start of the next 3-week cycle, I'm like, hey, I get all these new exercises, I get to play around with all this dope stuff and have a good time. So hope that answers your guys' questions. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. We got the Mat Jacked training course coming soon. If you guys are interested in packing on slabs of muscle, learning about athletic hypertrophy training, so that way you can not only maximize your muscle, but you can also maximize your hustle on the mat, definitely check that out. If you want to be the first to know when the Mat Jacked training course goes live, all you got to do is go to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler. Sign up for the Grappler Accelerator training program. That one is completely free, by the way. Grappler Accelerator is completely free. Start working through some of those workouts, start watching some of the nutrition videos, recovery videos. That's going to help you get ready and get geared up. So that way, as soon as Mat Jacked drops, you're going to be ready to dive into it, start packing on slabs of muscle. Thank you guys so much for listening. Lift heavy, roll hard, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.